This is Unit 2, U.S. History Regents Review, video number 2. The second president of the United States was John Adams. He was a Federalist. He was also the last Federalist to be president. Really the only Federalist. And during his administration, the main issue was that France and Britain were at war with one another, and they were trying to pull us into the conflict. We got involved. And there's some details to that you don't really need to know much about. You may need to know about the XYZ affair, where basically we send some emissaries over to France and they are really insulted, and the French won't meet with them. They want a bribe before they'll meet with our representatives. And basically we are very offended, and Americans get enraged at France for how they are treated. So we're having all these issues with France, and Adams decides to pass these very controversial laws. These are laws you may need to know. They're called the Alien and Sedition Acts. And what they do is they give the power to the government to deport immigrants and make citizenship harder to obtain. And this is really about French people. They want to keep French people out of the country, and they want to make it harder for them to be citizens. And possibly the more controversial part is that it made it illegal to criticize the government. This directly goes against freedom of speech guaranteed in the Bill of Rights, that you are allowed to have your own political opinions. So people are outraged. In particular, Jefferson and Madison are enraged by this law. A lot of Americans were, but they actually go behind Adams' back and the federal government's back, and they write these resolutions called the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions that nullify the federal laws. So basically, Kentucky and Virginia said that they could nullify, they could reject the federal law because they didn't like it and they thought it was unjust. This is a big deal because this concept undermines our system of federalism and the system of government that the Constitution set up, that says that the federal government has supremacy over state governments. So the question comes up, can a state just ignore a federal law? According to our Constitution, no, it cannot. This is going to be a big controversy that we see repeated more than once, and eventually, at the end of this unit, turns into the Civil War, where states think that they can reject federal authority. This is the first major example of that. Under the time that Adams is first in office, through later presidents, the Supreme Court Chief Justice is named John Marshall. His time as Supreme Court Justice is significant because we see several court cases that empower and uphold the power of the federal government. John Marshall is a Federalist, and the federal government's power is strengthened. So the court cases you may need to know, most important of them all is Marbury versus Madison. This court case established the court's power of judicial review. The actual details of the court case are pretty confusing. Adams tries to appoint some, quote, midnight judges and give them judgeships at the last minute, and there's controversy over whether that has to happen or not. You don't need to memorize all those details. You do need to know that Marbury versus Madison establishes judicial review, the power of the Supreme Court that it gave itself to review laws and actions of the federal government and decide if they are constitutional or not. That's a big deal. Another court case is called McCulloch versus Maryland, that upheld the power of the government to create the national bank. It said the state of Maryland can't just tax the national bank. It says that, yeah, the government was right to use the Elastic Clause to create a national bank. The government does have that power. And the case Gibbons versus Ogden, New York State can't pass a law that gave a steamship company a monopoly. Why? Because boats travel on water, and sometimes these waterways go through multiple states. This upholds the Commerce Clause of the Constitution that says that the federal government can regulate interstate trade. This is a huge theme that we will see because this allows the federal government to get involved in the economy. Anytime there is an issue that involves more than one state, the federal government can use the Commerce Clause to get involved. This will come up especially whenever we talk about monopolies in the end of the 19th century. Thomas Jefferson, after a really bitter election, becomes the third president of the United States. So you can even see in this little graphic over here, they got really nasty. Adams and Jefferson ran against each other. Adams did not win re-election. He had become really unpopular after the Alien and Sedition Acts, and Jefferson wins the presidency. But the good thing is that this is sometimes called the Revolution of 1800, because this is a successful transfer of power from the Federalists to the Democratic Republicans. It might not seem like a big deal today, but the fact that there was a group in power that saw that they lost the election and willingly chose to give up that power to the other group was a revolution in and of itself that said our democracy is working. Keep in mind, the same time that we are doing this over in the United States, France is having a revolution. People are seizing power. We can't take that for granted, that this group willingly gave up power. So our democracy is working. When Jefferson becomes president, he finds that his strict interpretation of the Constitution is challenged. He has a strict interpretation. He wants to just read the Constitution, never go above the powers that it grants the president. However, he finds once he's president, practical things end up outweighing his principles. So he ends up doing things like keeping the National Bank, which he originally hated because it's helping the country. And he ends up approving the Louisiana Purchase, which went against his beliefs. Another action that might come up, there were still issues going down between Britain and France. Our sailors were being impressed. They were being kidnapped. And eventually he decides to punish Britain and France by refusing to trade with them and having an embargo. And all that did was hurt our economy really badly. So they called it the Dambarg, the Dambargo, the oh cursed, oh grab me. That's embargo backwards. And that hurt people's opinion of him. But let's look more specifically at the Louisiana Purchase. The United States wanted control of the port of New Orleans and access to the Mississippi River for trade. Here is one of those big themes of geography. So if you take a look at this map, New Orleans is down here. It's a port. It's where trade can happen. It connects us with the Atlantic Ocean. And it's at the bottom of the Mississippi River, which connects the north of the United States, the Great Lakes up here, all the way to the south. This is a significant river in American history because of the trade that it allows. So all we wanted was this port and access to the river. And Jefferson sends some envoys to go meet with Napoleon and his guys, France, to try to get this. And Napoleon ends up offering him all of this. And it is too big, too good of a deal to pass up. So Jefferson is forced to go against his strict interpretation of the Constitution and make this purchase, which doubles the size of the country. This is a huge deal, best deal in history. And then he sends Lewis and Clark off to go explore it. 2 more presidents after this. You won't really need to know much about this. I highly doubt you'll be asked about it, but you should know we fought against Great Britain again in the War of 1812. It ends in a stalemate. Really, the big losers are the Native Americans. They helped the British because they thought they would get some help and benefits at the end, but they don't. Andrew Jackson becomes a huge war hero in the Battle of New Orleans, and the Federalists really lose out. The Monroe Doctrine you do need to know. It warned Europe to stay out of the Americas.